intended this morning to film in front of a post-Soviet, well, it was a Soviet memorial, the bronze soldier, that caused a lot of controversy here in Tallinn. Maybe it was about almost 2 decades ago when it was moved from the center, from the Freedom Square out to a park. It's actually not too far from where I'm staying here in Tallinn, but it was extremely cold. I didn't want to live stream from there, but perhaps I will do that if the temperature rises a little bit, do an in situ live stream, a bit like I did in Narva. So I'm here in Estonia still, and there have been significant developments because they actually disconnected, not just here in Estonia, but also in Latvia and Lithuania, the 3 Baltic states, from Russian electricity, from the Russian electricity grid. That has happened yesterday, I think, here. And I think, anyways, the whole thing is completed by the end of this weekend. It is Sunday, the 9th of February when I'm filming this. So they had a lot of people apparently on standby in case everything collapsed. But here in Tallinn, I haven't noticed any difference. And it's just as well because it is particularly chilly outside. It's obviously the winter time here. So in general, with this geopolitical channel, I will be making more content. Again, I did take a pause for about a month because of my lifestyle channel, and that is something I needed to focus on, but we should be back to making regular videos here. It's a pretty crucial time because there are the first kind of rumblings of maybe negotiations, maybe a peace deal with Ukraine. A lot of things I've seen in different types of media would maybe lead you to believe that we are pretty close to some sort of resolution. I personally don't share those sentiments. I think we are a long way off. I'm very skeptical that we'll even see a ceasefire before the middle of 2025 at least. That is because I don't see the incentives for either side in the war, Russia or Ukraine, to end this war or even pause it at the current juncture. And I saw this morning that Boris Johnson, the former British Prime Minister, is also an American citizen. He published in, I guess, an op-ed, or I think it's a regular column in the Daily Mail. And it is interesting because he was obviously, when he was Prime Minister, a big supporter of Ukraine. He was possibly the first foreign head of government to go to Kyiv after the invasion, the extended invasion of February 2022. I remember those iconic images of Boris Johnson rolling down the main thoroughfare of Kiev, Khreshchatyk, with Zelensky. And at the time, people were amazed because it was still considered so dangerous to go to Kyiv. And Boris Johnson just showed up to show his support. Of course, those detractors, normally people who support Russia in this war, they say, oh, he stopped the peace deal because he told the Ukrainians not to, well, it would have been a surrender deal in effect that was been offered by Russia. And that is why I'm also very skeptical there's going to be any sort of ceasefire at the moment, because Russia basically under Vladimir Putin still wants a surrender from Ukraine, if not an immediate explicit surrender, but something that will lead to it. And in this column from Boris Johnson, there are 2 short sentences I want to read out that are pertinent to the situation that we have at the moment. The article isn't actually that long. You can go, obviously, just look at Boris Johnson Daily Mail and then find it. It is behind a paywall, but if you do the copy and paste really quickly, select all, copy paste, you can read it without having to subscribe to Daily Mail if you are that way inclined. And the difference between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and quoting what he wrote here, is that Ukrainians are fighting for freedom, for their national right to determine their own destiny, and that emotion, patriotism, is one of the most powerful in the human breast. So that is the fundamental difference, and probably why Ukraine has exceeded expectations. People tend to look at the relative size of the countries. Russia is obviously a lot bigger in terms of population size and resources. Their military looked a lot bigger. But you have to also look at their will to fight and the motivation to fight. Russians, you could say they were caught unaware, the soldiers, many of them who ended up fighting in Ukraine at the beginning. But you can't say that about the soldiers who are the bulk of the Russian army at this point, because they are voluntary contract soldiers. It's mainly a voluntary army. They did have limited mobilization in Russia back in the autumn of 2022, and Okay, the soldiers originally were there, the original army, how many of them actually knew they were going to be sent to Ukraine, that's unclear. But they are there basically. I don't think too many of their ideology. I think it's for the high wages, whilst Ukrainians are fighting for the existence of the right to be Ukrainian, to not be in the Russian Empire, because Russia is imperial. I don't know who's really going to debate that objectively nowadays, since they want to reconquer territory that they lost, Moscow lost control of with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. And that patriotism is one of the main factors, one of the main differences that gives Ukraine an advantage. They are on home soil fighting for their right to exist as an independent polity, independent of Moscow control. That's basically one of the main things. I think that's something that people have underestimated, the power of patriotism. Sometimes you could make an analogy also with nationalism, although it's a little bit different in Ukraine. I think patriotism is the apt word that Boris Johnson used here, and that is still one of the main factors that drives. There are obviously other factors that are making a significant difference. And throughout the op-ed or the column, he discusses, he's very buoyant on Donald Trump becoming president of the US, remain optimistic that he is going to back Ukraine to actually win ultimately. Of course, then we have to redefine what win is, because it doesn't seem to be what I expected a victory would look like back in, say, the autumn of 2022, after Ukraine had taken back most of Kharkiv Oblast and the city of Kherson. I thought they would win a complete victory in the sense of regaining control of all of their territory, it looked like at that time, if they had been backed to actually do that. But it seems pretty clear the Biden administration did not want Ukraine to win militarily and regain all their territory. Otherwise, they would have given them more aid quicker and helped them and taken off and not imposed restrictions of what they were supposed to do with weapons, which really looks ridiculous in hindsight what they were doing. And I'll just read another little quote here. It's a couple of sentences from Boris Johnson that stood out for me in this column. Unless we settle, I'm quoting him again here, unless we settle Ukraine's destiny as part of the West, protected by Western security guarantees, Putin will be handed a triumph, in quotes. So yes, that is ultimately what I guess we are now redefining what victory looks like. It is that they are able to leave Russia's orbit definitively and become part of the West. I consider parts of Ukraine that are free from Russian control as part of the West. They need to be protected by Western security guarantees. But again, we get into a lot of debate there, because from Ukraine's point of view, joining NATO or having nuclear weapons is basically, or conventional military that would be able to prevent or deter a renewed Russian invasion, are the only real security guarantees. But if we look at Western security guarantees, obviously we had the Budapest Memorandum back in the early 90s, in which Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus give up their control of the Soviet nuclear weapons, handed them back to Russia along with other military equipment, which seems mad nowadays, in exchange for security assurances, which basically amounted to absolutely nothing in reality. Russia obviously violated what they signed there, and then the other countries like the US and the UK did not intervene to protect Ukraine. So short of NATO membership, because NATO membership has Article 5 protections, which is that all other members of NATO are required to come to the assistance of a country that is under an attack. And without that kind of ironclad security guarantee, although you might argue that Donald Trump hasn't seemed so keen on NATO and NATO security guarantees in any case, but it definitely would be better than some piece of paper saying, yeah, we promised to come, kind of a bit like what they had with the assurances in the Budapest Memorandum. But that is basically what the war is about. In essence, it's whether Ukraine has a right to leave Russia's orbit, leave its former colonizer and be an independent state, been Irish. It seems kind of odd to me that a lot of people question whether Ukraine has a right to be independent of Moscow, and especially when they bring up the language point, because, well, I speak English. Almost everybody in Ireland speaks English as their first language. Some people are effectively bilingual. They speak Irish as first language, but it's a very small percentage, definitely way less than 5% of the population. And no one really questions whether Ireland has a right to be independent. I guess maybe in maybe the mid 1920s, just after Ireland got limited independence, that was what people would have questioned as well. But 30 years, over more than 30 years of Ukrainian independence, seems mad that people try to question whether they should have a right to do that. This whole idea that it can be a neutral state is just absolutely naive to think. They're either going to be in one camp or the other. They're either going to be in Russia's orbit, or they're going to be in the West, in the orbit of, you could say, the US or the European Union, which they aspire to join, and that they are currently a candidate country for. So let me continue with but failing, the important point is the very last part of that sentence. Putin will be handed a triumph unless Ukraine is allowed to become part of the West, and I agree with that. I don't think that Western security guarantees, short of NATO membership, really would amount to much as a deterrent. And that's also why I'm very skeptical about opposing the fighting or any sort of negotiated peace plan. You could end up with a Minsk III situation where neither side has any genuine desire or intention to actually respect the terms of any sort of ceasefire or peace agreement. That could be possible while both sides try to rearm and gain an advantage through opposing the fighting. But that's about as much that would happen short of NATO membership for Ukraine, whether that would only apply to the parts of Ukraine that are still free from Russian occupation. To continue the quote from Boris Johnson, he will keep what he has and use his position to destabilize and attack Ukraine by whatever means until the government of Kyiv collapses, a civil war breaks out, and the whole demoralized country drifts back into his baleful orbit. And that is what he would intend to do. And that's clear in the situation where he's not able to win in outright military victory, which looks very unlikely for Russia at this point in time. We're coming up to the third anniversary of Russia's 2022 invasion. They originally invaded in 2014 by seizing the Crimean Peninsula and starting basically a war in the Donbass region and the occupied parts of that through some local proxies, some separatist groups, collaborators basically, who were mainly locals, but also had some Russian imperialists who joined them to try and seize that territory in a revanchist attack. So that is a very likely scenario if Ukraine is forced to have a ceasefire or some sort of what I would call a faux peace agreement, unless it has proper deterrence elements built into it. That would be either Ukraine gets nuclear weapons, although Ukraine currently occupies part of Russia in the Kursk Oblast, even though it's only a small part. Nuclear weapons didn't prevent Ukraine from doing that, obviously in the context of the Russo-Ukrainian war and Russian aggression. Or they have nuclear protection, or in conjunction with the Article 5 security guarantees of NATO that would act as a deterrence to Russia. But the kind of plan that I've seen bantered around that, or in the media, that that there's going to be some peacekeepers there, some French or British forces that will be near the line of contact in relatively small numbers, doesn't seem like it's a realistic plan as a deterrence. I mean, Russia's pretty close to annexing Belarus, and they already used Belarusian territory to attack Ukraine. They could just move their army to the north around them. It doesn't seem like it would really act as much of a deterrence without real security guarantees that basically, if Russia were to attack Ukraine again, then they would be in a war with the NATO alliance. And considering Russia can't win after over 10 years of attacking Ukraine, 3 years of this extended invasion against Ukraine, the chances of them in a conventional war having much chance against NATO forces at this current point are very slim. So you can go read the whole article if you so desire. And the final sentence of Boris Johnson's column this morning was, nothing else works for Ukraine or the world. This war will only be over when Putin finally understands that Ukraine is never coming back under his thumb. And I think I would extend that to say it's not just Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, for me, in my estimation, is the result of Russian imperialism and the lack of desire of the majority of the Russian population to abandon imperialism. Russia needs, in my opinion, further decolonization to become what the late Navalny referred to as a normal country. It is not a nation state. It is in effect an empire with most of its contiguous. It's mainly a land empire. They do have one kind of colony that they obviously have as part of their metropolitan territory, which is Kaliningrad, actually, between Poland. It's an exclave between Poland and Lithuania. Other than that, it's contiguous. People, for some reason, don't realize that that's what Russia is. It is, in effect, an empire, and more parts of the empire will have to leave, and the power of Moscow will have to be reduced, and the size of the country will have to get smaller before perhaps there will be the internal reform within Russia, and that's necessary. We had one decolonization process with the dissolution of the USSR back in 1991. That meant that Moscow's power got a lot smaller. They lost 14 former Soviet socialist republics. They became independent countries. Ukraine was one of them. And until that happens, I don't see much changing within Russia. So in general, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. It depends on your point of view, because I don't think Ukraine should sign a ceasefire agreement or a peace agreement that doesn't have proper security guarantees or a way to deter Russia from further aggression at a minimum. In fact, even that would be debatable whether it would be worth that risk, in my opinion. But it will be interesting to see in the coming weeks and months what comes of it. I don't also expect Vladimir Putin to agree to it, because from his point of view, he is gaining territory very, very slowly. It's like piecemeal, it's tiny, but it is some sort of progress as a metric. And he would also be taking a risk if he were to imagine Vladimir Putin accepts a peace deal that really has security guarantees for Ukraine. That means he can't invade again. That means he's failed. What is he going to do with all those soldiers? Well, he can't let them come back to Russia. He might overthrow him, because they're going to be unemployed, a lot of them, and earning drastically lower wages, and they're used to violence, and they're probably, a lot of them, completely traumatized. They will try and seize power. That is a big risk that would happen. So he's going to have to send them somewhere else and start a new conflict pretty soon. So I think he's all in that without Ukraine, Russia can't be a global power. Basically, going to be a regional actor. That was a quote from, to paraphrase, a quote from Brzezinski, isn't that his name? I can't remember his first name. Is Polish American. I can't remember what was his position. He was like was a head. To see what he's. Maybe I don't have time to look at it. If I can find it quickly, former national security advisor. That was his term. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Not sure my Polish pronunciation is good on that, but yeah, that's what he said. There was a book he had. I actually heard him speak once at my former alma mater. Let me see if I can find his famous book. Is it going to come up? Let's see. If it comes up, no, not the U.S. lobby. There was a book that was quite popular around that time. Let me see if I can see it quickly enough. I guess it was The Choice, Global Domination or Global Leadership in 2004, because I would have listened to him speak around then. But I think he had a book, The Grand Chessboard is the one before, in 1997. American primacy and the geostrategic imperatives without control of Ukraine, either by annexing it or by installing a public government and controlling it. Russia is just a regional actor. That was what he claimed more than 25 years ago. It was coming up in 30 years ago. And it is reduced to being just a regional power. And Vladimir Putin is all in on being remembered like Peter the Great or Catherine the Great. He wants to be remembered as a czar-like figure who restored Russian greatness or power in reality. So I don't think he's going to accept it. And I also don't think Zelensky politically can sign anything like what Vladimir Putin would want. So I don't think, also, just as a final point, that I don't think Donald Trump really has that much leverage over either party, because if he pulls military support from Ukraine, then I think Ukraine will just fight on. They will find the war will take a lot longer. They'll be in a weaker position. The chance of them losing increases, but they would. That's what I would expect to happen. And then if he, I'm not sure what more U.S. can really do in terms of sanctions. Of course, they can have them enforce better secondary sanctions, but the U.S. and Russia don't do that much trade together, anyways, and yeah, there's probably not much additional pressure you can put on the economy in the short run. Of course, by drilling for more oil, that will push down the price. That will really additionally hurt the Russian economy. But that's not going to happen right now. That's not a short-term, like 6-month really effect in terms of you can ramp up the oil production, and that will push down the price of oil. But that will, the real effects that will be longer than 6 months to really take effect. So, or to really feel the impact. That said, the Russian economy by the second half of 2025 is likely to be in dire straits. They have rampant inflation, and they didn't raise their interest rate at the end of 2024. So probably going to be, it looks like they're taking the path of allowing inflation to increase. So very high probability we're going to see hyperinflation, which is over 50% per annum in the second half of 2025, and continuing problems with their economy. It may actually switch from full employment at the moment if a lot of companies start to go bankrupt, suddenly massive unemployment, and that will have a series of effects. Obviously, the economy running out of money is a big problem for continuing the war. At the same time, they'll have a lot of poor men who will be in a frightful financial position. They may be actually more tempted to accept the money for the Russian army to sign up, because the sign-up bonuses at this point are insane. I mean, I think I saw it put in context that during the Iraq War, the sign-up bonus for a U.S. soldier was less than the current sign-up bonuses for a Russian soldier, in spite of the cost of living differentials and the relative wealth of both countries. It's pretty mad. It's like getting a few $100,000 if you live in the U.S. to sign up for the war, and they are having huge problems in Russia to find new voluntary recruits at the moment. But again, if the economy starts to collapse, well, then maybe more men will be willing to go to the war and have a very high probability of being dead or seriously wounded in order to get that money. So we just have to see. There's sometimes, there are more dynamic effects. Anyways, I will wrap it up there for this live stream. Just a quick update and commenting on what Boris Johnson wrote today. I just saw it there before I logged on. And I will be making more content for this channel going forward in the coming weeks and months. As I said, I don't expect the Russo-Ukrainian war to come to an end anytime very soon, in spite of Donald Trump being rather buoyant on his chances of finding some sort of peace deal in inverted commas. So I'll leave it at that. Write your comments down below what topics you might want me to comment on. My name is Connor Klein. If you just happen to discover this channel, I doubt that's going to be for many people, since maybe you've come over from my lifestyle channel. I have a background in international relations. So I studied actually at the best school in the world for international relations at Johns Hopkins University at their School of Advanced International Studies. That's why I went to presentations from the likes of Brzezinski more than 20 years ago. And I have been living in Ukraine for many years. I'm not currently there. As I said, I'm in Tallinn in Estonia, wearing this here, the an Estonian top that I bought at a souvenir shop. So I wanted to have a t-shirt from every country. I have one for Lithuania, Latvia, and obviously loads from Ukraine, some from Moldova. I need to buy a Polish one next time I get back to Poland, make some videos. And I speak both Ukrainian and Russian. I've been to Russia a few times as well, but obviously I know things from the Ukrainian point of view a lot better, since that is where I've spent much of my time. Even with this extended invasion since 2022, I left for a few months at the beginning, but basically I've been back most of the time, except for this little gap abroad when I've been in the Baltic states. So lots of great stuff coming to the channel. Write your comments, what you think about Boris Johnson's claims in today's column in the Daily Mail. Also, whether you think Donald Trump does have leverage or doesn't have leverage over Russia and Ukraine to find some sort of peace deal, and whether you think peace is likely regardless in the coming months. We'll see up to mid-2025, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.